What's up, Vikings fans? I hope you're staying safe, staying healthy. Welcome to another edition of our Vikings at Home show presented by Bose. I'm your host, Gabe Henderson, and I wanted to talk football today. So to start the show, I would like to bring in ESPN's national NFL writer who has been covering the Vikings for over a decade, Kevin Seifert. Welcome to the show, Kevin.
Thanks, Gabe. Good to be here. Good to meet you.
The big topic heading into the offseason for the Vikings was the departure of both Stephon Diggs as well as Kevin Stefanski. You address the Diggs situation by bringing in Tajay Sharp and Justin Jefferson. Then you promote Gary Kubiak to full-time offensive coordinator. How do you think this Gary Kubiak-led offense will fare this year without Kevin Stefanski?
I think it's going to be really good still. And it's really no slight at Kevin Stefanski to say that Gary Kubiak sort of came up with a lot of this offense. If you go back on his history as a coordinator or even as a head coach who was calling plays, his offenses have always been really productive. Especially when they're sort of situated like the Vikings offense is, with a strong running back, good tight ends, and a quarterback who can get outside the pocket on the bootlegs and that sort of play, those sort of plays. And so I really think that they have every chance to be just as good and quite possibly better in sort of the year two of the scheme when they get back for 2020.
You talk about the quarterback situation. Kirk Cousins, he answered the questions. Can he win the big game? He beat the Saints last year. He gets an extension. Last year was basically his best year statistics-wise of his career. But what else do we need to see from Kirk Cousins to make that next big step in his career?
Yeah, I mean, the next big step is the hardest one, and that's getting to the Super Bowl and winning it. And so as you get higher and higher up the pyramid, it becomes steeper and steeper to get to the top. And so he certainly has that challenge. I don't know that there's anything, on the field that he really needs to elevate specifically. If they had won that Saints game in some other way, if they had, if Dalvin Cook had ripped off an 80-yard run and they had won and we hadn't seen the way Kirk Cousins took over in the overtime, especially with a throw to Thielen and then to Rudolph, then maybe we'd say, well, let's see him lead, if he can lead a team to a win in the playoffs. But really, he's shown us that, from a mentality standpoint, and from a physical standpoint, that he can do all of the things that need to be done to win a Super Bowl. And really, it would just be about doing it a little bit more often. Not having games like that occurred in the beginning of last year against the Bears and the Packers, and just playing at that high level for a full 16 or soon to be 17 games, and then getting through the playoffs as well. And so it's a final step. It's the most difficult step there is, but that would be the final step we'd want to see from him.
Would you still consider Danielle Hunter underrated? I mean, 29 sacks in the last two seasons. Yeah. I feel like he still doesn't get that credit that he deserves.
Yeah, I think he's the most overrated, underrated player in the NFL, if that's the best way to put it. Every time we do a list of who are the most underrated players, or what's the list of people nobody's ever talking about, Danielle Hunter is always at the top. So at some point, by default, we're talking about him by talking about how often he's not talked about, I guess. And so that's a long way of saying that, I think that if people are not aware of how good he is, then they're just not paying attention well enough. I know his personality is not like some of the other pass rushers currently in the NFL and historically in the NFL that really kind of draw attention and make news. And he's sort of the opposite of that. So we never really hear him publicly saying much that would draw attention to himself one way or the other, or doing things off the field that would draw attention to himself. So maybe that's why some people have not noticed him, but I think any serious football fan or football analyst who's watching the game knows just how good he is.
Who would you say is another underrated guy on this roster, on this Vikings roster, that fans should keep an eye on this season?
I don't know if he'd be underrated for Vikings fans who probably were excited, but just from a national perspective, Irv Smith, tight end, for a couple reasons. One, it always he's a rookie, so last year, and so at the very beginning, he's not necessarily drawing a lot of attention. And Kyle Rudolph is having a great year on the field as well as a veteran, and even towards the end of the year, especially. But you look at we talked about the Gary Kubiak offense earlier, and you look at it, and there's always high production, not just from one tight end, but often from two. And so if there's a guy who isn't really being talked a lot about nationally, especially on this roster that's in position to really kind of explode onto the scene. I think he would be the first guy that I would think of, Irv Smith.
When you sign 2 first-rounders like we did this past year's draft, you expect them to come in and make an immediate impact. Justin Jefferson, Jeff Gladney, the guys I'm talking about. How realistic should those expectations be, though?
I mean, you have to look at the history, especially for Gladney as a DB. In the Mike Zimmer scheme, there's been a lot of highly drafted, or in the Mike Zimmer era, there's been a lot of highly drafted cornerbacks, especially, and it's usually taken them a while to get on the field, whether it was because of development or in case of Mike Hughes had some injuries. But you look at it took Trey Waynes almost, I think, until his 3rd year until he was a full-time starter. Mackenzie Alexander didn't really ever get to that point. And Mike Hughes, I think maybe it'll happen for him this year. We'll have to see, but it takes a while. So you say, like, you draft Gladney, number one in the first round, and you say, well, obviously he's going to be a major contributor, and he probably will. But in terms of being on the field all the time, I think you have to look at the history, and that it usually takes a while under Mike Zimmer for that to happen. Receiver, I think Jefferson's got a great chance to be an immediate impact guy. There was a time when we would always say, well, receiver is a position you can never, be a 1,000-yard type, 70 to 80 catch type guy as a rookie. But I think there's a lot of agreement that he was one of the most pro-ready receivers out there in the draft. So that gives him a leg up. And 2, there's the opportunity, as you mentioned at the top with Stephon Diggs moving on, there's certainly that opportunity. So I could see it for him for sure. But in terms of Gladney, it would certainly go against the recent precedent if he can be a, every down contributor right away.
A guy like you that's, made a living writing, but also made a living, being very analytical on NFL rules and how rules changes and how they affect certain teams. Of course, this new CBA that comes into effect this year. And I guess the major impacts are going to start in 2021. But speaking of, just immediate impacts of this new CBA deal, do you think there are any rules this year that will benefit the Vikings of some sort?
Well, and I don't mean this as a backslap, but the extended playoff format is good for everybody. We've all seen teams that were 100% playoff caliber teams, playoff quality type teams who, for whatever reason, there were some injuries and they lost some games they shouldn't have, and all of a sudden they're fighting and they're on their way to 9-7 or 10-6, and they're going to be not going to make the playoffs. That's going to be much less likely now. And you look at the strength of the NFC North and the NFC in general, and you say it's not out of the question that the Vikings could be in that spot where, pretty good team, veteran quarterback, coach has been there a long time. They should have themselves together. But, lots of things can happen over the course of a year. And if they're at that, approaching that 9-7, 10-6 type position, and you're getting to the end of the year and you have that extra playoff spot, that's huge. And so I think to the extent that it will help anybody, it'll help the Vikings as well. And something that everybody across the league should be, in my opinion, happy about.
We all know Dalvin Cook's importance to this Minnesota Vikings team. What are your thoughts on this entire situation that's going on?
Yeah, I mean, he is in a position that you could have guessed he would be in the moment he was drafted. And that draft class he was in with so many great running backs that were taken after the first round, which meant that they'd have a 4-year contract and eligible for a new extension after 3 and eligible for free agency after 4. You knew this was where it was going to be. And he's not going to be the only one who's in this position where he's earned a better contract. He's earned more money. He's a central figure in the offense, a lot like Alvin Kamara is, in New Orleans, and you can just go on down the line in terms of other running backs from that draft. But in the same token, you can say he's had injury problems, and running backs in general are not considered great investments on second contracts. So what I think is that this situation was completely predictable, and I doubt Dalvin Cook's really upset about it if he sits down and thinks about it logically, because we all knew the situation 3 years ago when that draft occurred. The Vikings probably know this is part of the process as well. I have no concern that it's going to impact his production this season. I don't know, I don't know if anyone knows for sure where it's going to go. I do think that the Vikings have made a good faith effort to try to get something done with him, and will continue to do that within the parameters of what the running back market is in the league. And so it doesn't feel to me like a really a significantly bad situation, or that there's a lot of animosity there. It just seems like it was part of the business that we all knew was coming.
Lastly, do you give the Vikings a legitimate chance to win the division this year?
Yeah, I think there's been years when you go into it and you say, like, it's not happening. And this is not one of them. You look at the Packers, who had a great year last year. Just from a numbers standpoint, they're much more likely to come back from the record they finished with last year than they are to improve on it. The Bears, if they end up with Nick Foles as their quarterback, they'll be a better team, I think, than they were last year with Mitch Trubisky, maybe somewhere in between what they were 2 years ago and last year. And then the Lions have kind of gone all in on saving their jobs, I think, whether it's Matt Patricia, the head coach, or the general manager, Bob Quinn. And so they have made some moves designed to be much more competitive right now. So I think it's going to be a very competitive division, but I don't see any of those teams dramatically ahead of anyone else. So, the Vikings, I think, definitely have a chance to win the NFC North, and I think at least two, and maybe the third competitor in the division have a chance as well.
Thank you, Kevin.
All right, thank you, Gabe.
Well, Kevin's saying pretty optimistic about Dalvin Cook heading into this offseason. Another positive is Dalvin Cook's numbers from his 2019 campaign. Let's take a look inside the numbers of the running back heading into his fourth season with the Vikings.
Handoff, Dalvin sprints out to the left, gets a block from Thielen, walks into the end zone, touchdown! Dalvin Cook! Rudolph in motion, it's a toss right. Dalvin turns it up to the 5, walks into the end zone, yes he does! Touchdown, Vikings! His 13th rushing touchdown this season. 1st and 10 from the Green Bay 26, offset eye right, Cousins under center, swings it out right flat, Cook on the run, 25-20, 15-10, to the 5, touchdown! Dalvin Cook got into the end zone!
We cannot end the show without shining a light on the recent tragedy that happened right here in our backyard a few weeks ago with the death of George Floyd. With the world already in angst due to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, the layers were peeled back on another issue that has been affecting this great nation of America since 1619. That issue is called racism. While this issue in America has been going on for over 400 years, I think we're finally starting to work towards finding a solution. The first step in finding a solution is admitting a problem exists. And during these times, those tough conversations are needed in order for us to become united and make action steps together. As a Vikings family, we have already started those conversations. And to end this week's show, we leave you with a glimpse of what we are doing as a community to make those action steps towards change.
Minneapolis is a place that, I care about really deeply. It breaks my heart to see the people of Minneapolis, not only treated like this, but, how hurt they are by this, you know what I mean? I know there's a lot of you guys that feel probably similar to me, This isn't a problem that's going to be fixed overnight. It's going to take accountability from each of us, I say that because I'm applying the pressure to myself as well. I'm applying the pressure to myself to do more.
2020 has really hit me hard personally. I live in Atlanta, Georgia, so to experience Ahmaud Arbery in February, and then in the very city that I live in during the season, have George Floyd, it was two gut punches to me. And but it was also a wake-up call that this has been a persisting and prominent issue in America for centuries. And I think we all know that change doesn't happen overnight. But just like Eric says, we have to learn from our history to begin to fix a lot of these things that are going on.
When this issue translates from people being sympathetic to people being empathetic, that's where we're going to see change. And, you know, I've mentioned our Players Coalition a couple times, and I can't tell you what that's done for me and my perspective. You know, had I not been in sports and had I not been around other athletes of color and listen to them and hear their stories, I wouldn't be able to have empathy for them because I don't know what it's like. Through sitting in these meetings and listening to their stories and listening to the instances that they've been put in, it's allowed me to be empathetic. And I think that kind of goes across our league. Our owners, as Amir said, are sitting in these meetings. They're listening to the stories that our guys are telling, and they're becoming empathetic. Through dialogue, our entire league can become empathetic for the people that are going through these tough times.
It's been very helpful with the team and just being part of a locker room where the organization has, you know, given us a little platform with taking us on a trip, you know, with the group of kids from Minneapolis to DC to visit the African American Museum and also to visit the Holocaust Museum. So I think that was a big step, I know, for me personally, kind of getting the insight and learning more about our owners and building that connection and learning a little bit about, you know, what each of our own individual families have, you know, went through.
I called a meeting together with our entire personnel department, and that meeting and all the meetings we're doing was so emotional, and tears flowed from that meeting. But to sit there and listen to one of our minority scouts tell them when they travel around this country, and if they get pulled over, they don't know if they're going to go home and see their families. Is this the last time I got a chance or opportunity to talk to my family? And our white scouts and our white personnel people that were on there can't understand that because they never been in that situation. It's really brought to light that we really have to listen to each other. We really have to educate ourselves. We truly have to have these uncomfortable conversations and not be afraid.
You know, a lot of people watch us, you know. A lot of people, they're influenced by what we do. So, you know, just coming out and just making a difference, being a difference, you know, and restarting the community. You know, that'll influence the younger ones for when they grow up, you know, they'll have the same change of heart. You know, like, okay, if something happens, then, you know, I could be the one to change it. You know, it'll start with me.
When the tragedy happened a couple weeks ago, it was real easy for Rick and I to get the committee together, and we did. And so one of the things they brought up was trying to put a scholarship together in George Floyd's name. And it only took 1 week, and the Vikings came together and got that done. So we're going to be able to put a scholarship in George Floyd's name that we're going to be able to give to an African-American student to be able to continue their education in college.
I'm thankful. I'm thankful for the, you know, that me and my teammates in the Vikings, you know, have been making major steps. You know, we're doing things to try to help this. You know, we're trying to get in the community. We're trying to reach people as best we can. You know, obviously we need to improve clearly, but we're doing so, and we will continue to do so. But I just want to hold you guys to that same standard because it's going to take all of us. You know what I mean? For real. You know, it's like I said, it's not going to happen overnight, but we got to do something. And if you're doing nothing, it's not good enough.